Summary of Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. The Richardson house caught on fire, and the main suspect is Izzy Richardson, the youngest of the 4 Richardson children. The firemen who looked at the damage found little fires everywhere in the house, which means there were multiple points of origin. Mrs. Richardson and her 3 older kids, Lexi, Trip, and Moody, stand on the yard and look at the damage and wonder where Izzy went. The story then jumps back to June of the year before, when Mia and Pearl Warren moved to Shaker Heights, Ohio, to live on the top floor of the Richardsons' rental property on Winslow Road. This was one of the less desirable fringe areas of the well-kept utopian planned community. Pearl and Mia have moved around a lot, living in different places. Mia has told Pearl that this time, they will stay put. Pearl Warren's first friend from the Richardson family is Moody. As their relationship grows, Moody invites Pearl to his house, hoping that she will be as interested in his family as he is in Pearl and her mother's magic trick of a life. Pearl is dazzled by the Richardsons. Mrs. Richardson is a writer, Mr. Richardson is a lawyer, and all of their children are artlessly beautiful. Mia starts to notice that Pearl's crush on the Richardsons is getting stronger, but she tells herself that she owes Pearl a normal life and lets her keep going to their house every day. There, Pearl watches Jerry Springer, goes to the mall or thrift stores with Lexi, flirts with the charming Trip, and gets an expensive notebook from Moody, who has feelings for Pearl. Pearl is asked to a party at the home of famous girl Stacey Perry, who is known for throwing wild parties. Pearl, Lexi, and Serena Wong all like how the party is starting out. When Brian, Lexi's boyfriend, comes over, the two of them sneak away to have sex. Pearl looks for Lexi, Serena, and Trip when she is a little drunk and alone, but she can't find any of them. Pearl then calls Moody, who comes to get her in his mother's car. Pearl stays out past her bedtime, which upsets Mia. The next Tuesday, Mrs. Richardson checks in with Mia and Pearl at their apartment. Mrs. Richardson offers Mia a job as a cleaner when she finds out that she has had to do a number of odd jobs to make ends meet. Mia takes Mrs. Richardson's offer because she is glad to have a way into her daughter's new life. Pearl worries that her mother's presence will ruin her friendship with the Richardsons, especially her flirting with the beautiful Trip. One morning, Mia is home alone with Izzy, who has been kicked out of school for breaking Mrs. Peters' violin bow and throwing the parts in her face. Mrs. Peters is racist and drinks too much. Izzy is still upset about what happened days later, so Mia asks her, "What are you going to do about it?" Izzy is shocked to find out that no one has ever asked her this question in her whole life. Izzy comes up with a plan, with the help of Moody and Pearl, to jam the locks on every door in the school with toothpicks. The prank confuses the teachers and thrills the students, and it works perfectly. While waiting for her classroom to be opened, Mrs. Peters drinks coffee from a big thermos and urinates all over the floor of a student bathroom. This is how she got the nickname Mrs. Pissers. After the prank works, Izzy asks Mia to let her be her photography helper for free, and Mia agrees. When Pearl and Moody go to the art museum with their class, they see a painting that looks like it shows Mia holding a baby Pearl. A woman named Pauline Hawthorne is said to have taken the picture. They convince Lexi to drive them back to the museum after school, and all 3 of them agree that the woman in the picture is definitely Mia. When Pearl, Moody, Izzy, and Lexi talk to Mia's mother about the picture, Mia gets angry. Izzy is interested in Pauline Hawthorne but can't find any useful information about her on her own, so she asks her mother for help. Mrs. Richardson talks to a gallerist in New York City named Anita Rees, who also doesn't answer her questions. After Thanksgiving, their friends Linda and Mark McCullough throw a birthday party for their son. The Richardson family goes. The McCulloughs are in the process of adopting a 1-year-old Asian girl named Mirabelle, whose birth name was Mei Ling. The baby was left on the steps of a fire station. A social worker called the McCulloughs, and that same day they got temporary custody of Mirabelle. After the party, Lexi tells Mia about the miracle of Mirabelle's adoption. Mia has also taken a second job at Lucky Palace, a Chinese restaurant. Bibi Chow, one of Mia's co-workers, recently told her that a year ago, She had a baby but had to leave her on the steps of the fire station because she couldn't care for her, possibly because of postpartum depression. Even though Mia's number one rule is not to get attached, she calls Bibi to let her know where her daughter is. A few days later, Bibi shows up at Mia and Pearl's house in a fit of laughter. She says that she went to the McCullough's house to talk to them, but cops pulled her away. Mia tries to make Bibi feel better and tells her to fight this fight. The next day, the local news team surprises the McCulloughs in the afternoon, and the next night, an interview with Bibi herself airs. The media follows the McCulloughs everywhere, and a local lawyer named Ed Lim offers to defend Bibi for free when she sues the state for custody of Mei Ling. In the meantime, Mr. Richardson is asked to help the McCulloughs. Mrs. Richardson reads a story that says a co-worker at Lucky Palace told Bibi where Mei Ling was, and Mrs. Richardson realizes that the co-worker is Mia. Mrs. Richardson doesn't tell Mia about this, but she plans to look into her past to get back at her for the trouble she has caused. When Lexi gets into Yale, Mrs. Richardson offers to take her, Izzy, and Pearl out for a special girls' lunch in the hopes of getting Pearl to talk about Mia's past. Pearl tells Mrs. Richardson that she was born in San Francisco. Mrs. Richardson then asks for a copy of Pearl's birth certificate. When the birth certificate comes, it says where Mia was born. Mrs. Richardson uses this to find Mia's family, the Wrights, in Pittsburgh, where she learns that their son, Warren, died when he was 17, in 1982. Mrs. Richardson finds out where the Wrights live. At the same time, the argument about Mei Ling is a big deal in Shaker Heights. The Richardsons argue about how moral the situation is. Bibi Chow gets visiting rights, and the McCulloughs give an exclusive interview on the evening news, which adds fuel to the media circus. Mrs. Richardson books a flight to Pennsylvania, madder than ever at Mia for carelessly throwing sparks into the organized world of Shaker Heights. Pearl and Tripp start having an affair behind each other's backs. In the meantime, Lexi gets pregnant with Brian's child and makes an appointment at an abortion center. Lexi begs Pearl to go with her, and Pearl says she will. When Pearl gets to the clinic, she finds out that Lexi used her name to make the appointment. She is shocked and upset for a moment. Mrs. Richardson goes to the Wrights' house in Pittsburgh and says she is a reporter working on a story about promising teen athletes whose careers were cut short. After being pushed, the Wrights tell Mia's life story. Mia spent her childhood behind the lens of a camera that a neighbor gave her. When she went to college in New York City, she studied photography at a well-known art school. One of her teachers, the famous Pauline Hawthorne, took Mia under her wing right away, but Mia's education was cut short because her program didn't have enough money to pay for her grant. Mia had to find a way to keep paying for school, so she agreed to be a surrogate for a rich couple, the Ryans, who had been trying to have a child but couldn't. Except for her brother, Mia kept her pregnancy a secret from her family. Her brother stopped talking to her months before he died in an accident. When Mia went home for the funeral, her parents turned their backs on her because she was pregnant and ready to sell her own child. Mia was upset, so she wrote a note to the Ryans in which she lied that she had miscarried. She then left on a road trip across the country, which she hasn't come back from yet. The custody meeting starts in Shaker Heights. Mrs. McCullough is called to the stand on the last day of the meeting. Ed Lim, Bibi Chow's lawyer, makes it clear that the McCulloughs would be good and caring parents, but they wouldn't be able to, and maybe even wouldn't want to, raise Mei Ling in a way that is true to Chinese culture. Moody sees Pearl and Tripp together and gets angry. He hits Pearl, which breaks their friendship. Lexi breaks up with Brian, and she turns to Mia for help and comfort. Since the judge hasn't made a ruling yet, Mrs. McCullough and Mrs. Richardson start looking for anything they can use to help the McCulloughs. Mrs. McCullough notices that Bibi looked sick and fat a few weeks ago, and she wonders if she might have gotten pregnant and had an abortion. Mrs. Richardson calls her friend Elizabeth Manwill, who runs an abortion clinic. Lexi just went to this clinic a few weeks ago. Mrs. Richardson tries to get Elizabeth to give her the clinic's papers, but Elizabeth says no, so Mrs. Richardson does her own investigating. She finds Pearl's name in the appointment book and thinks that she and Moody have been sleeping together. She plans to talk to Moody that night. Case goes in favor of the McCulloughs. Bebe goes to Mia's house and hides in the kitchen because she is upset. Izzy is also at the house, and she asks Mia if Bebe will be okay. Mia says that people find a way to start over, like dirt after a prairie fire. Izzy goes back home. Mrs. Richardson talks to Moody that night, but he tells his mother Trip is the one screwing her. Izzy can hear everything from her room. Mrs. Richardson drives to the Warrens' house in the morning. She says that she knows about the Ryan situation and that Mia was the one who told Bebe where Mei Ling was. Mia has to leave the flat, she tells her. That afternoon, Mia gets to Pearl's school early to pick her up and tells her they're leaving Shaker Heights. Pearl is unhappy, so she starts to complain. She starts to imagine a life where the Richardsons take her in as one of their own. Mia talks Pearl into getting in the car with her, and the two of them go back to the house on Winslow to pack up their things. Pearl wants to know why they are going, so Mia finally tells Pearl where she and Pearl came from in her past. Izzy knocks on the door, but Mia sends her away, telling her again about the prairie fire story and saying, sometimes you need to start over from scratch. Izzy looks for Lexi, first at home, where she fights with Moody over how mean he is to Pearl, and then at Serena Wong's, where she finds Lexi and tells her about the abortion done in Pearl's name. Izzy goes back to the house on Winslow, and Mr. Young, who lives downstairs, tells her that Pearl and Mia just left. The next morning, Izzy, upset and angry about how her family had hurt the Warrens, chooses to set her house on fire. She packs up her things, pours gas all over the house, and lights a match so she can go find Mia and Pearl. The story then goes all the way back to the beginning of the book, right after the Richardson house has burned down. While the Richardson children wonder where their sister went and laugh about how much trouble she'll be in when she gets back, Mrs. Richardson plans their trip to the rental house on Winslow, where they'll stay for an undetermined amount of time. Once they get there, the Richardson family finds that Mia has left behind a set of art pieces that are like emotional snapshots of each member of the family. Mr. Richardson checks his voicemail and finds a message from a very upset Mr. McCullough. In the message, Mr. McCullough says that Bebe stole Mei Ling from her room during the night and took a flight to Canton. Mrs. Richardson decides that she will keep looking for Izzy as long as it takes.
About the author. Celeste Ng was born in Pittsburgh to parents who moved there from Hong Kong. Her father was a physicist and her mother was a chemist. She grew up in Shaker Heights, Ohio, which is where Little Fires Everywhere takes place. Ng went to Harvard and then to the well-known creative writing school at the University of Michigan. He has written essays and short stories that have been featured in many literary magazines. Her first book, Everything I Never Told You, was well received by critics when it came out in 2014. Like Little Fires Everywhere, it's a mystery-driven story that deals with racism and the breakdown of an American family.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.